The crystal chandelier cast perfect shadows across the marble floor of the Peterson estate as Ella adjusted her pearl necklace one final time. Everything had to be flawless for tonight's engagement party. The who's who of their social circle would gather to celebrate her upcoming marriage to Chad Reynolds, the heir to Reynolds Financial Group. It was the match everyone expected, the union that would cement two powerful families into one unstoppable force. "Ella, darling, you look absolutely radiant," her mother Lillian Peterson announced, gliding into the room wearing her signature emerald dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Chad's family will be so pleased. His mother specifically mentioned how proud she is to welcome you into their circle." Ella smiled the practiced smile she had perfected over years of social gatherings. "Thank you, Mother. I want everything to be perfect tonight." But as she spoke those words, something twisted in her stomach. Perfect. When had her life become so obsessed with perfection that she felt like she was suffocating in silk and diamonds? She pushed the thought away as quickly as it came. These were just pre-wedding nerves, nothing more. The memory hit her without warning, as it had been doing more frequently lately. Miles Thomas, the boy with the gentle smile and brilliant mind, who had looked at her with such hope in his eyes during their senior year of high school. She had been 17, standing by her locker when he approached her with a handwritten letter. "Ella, I know this might seem crazy, but I've been thinking about you every day for months," he had said, his voice trembling slightly. "Would you maybe want to go to prom with me? I know we're from different worlds, but I think we could make it work." She remembered the way her heart had actually skipped when he said those words. Miles was different from the boys in her social circle. He was genuine, intelligent, kind. But then she had looked around the hallway, seen the stares from her friends, imagined her father's reaction if she brought home a black boy from the wrong side of town. "Miles, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm already going with someone else," she had lied, watching his face crumble. "Besides, we really are from different worlds. It would never work." The hurt in his eyes had haunted her for years, but she had buried it deep beneath layers of social expectations and family pressure. She had convinced herself it was the right decision, the only decision that made sense for someone in her position. "Ella, are you listening to me?" Her mother's sharp voice snapped her back to the present. "Yes, of course. What were you saying?" "I was asking if you finalized the guest list for the rehearsal dinner. We can't have any surprises or unwanted attendees." "It's all handled, Mother. Only the approved families will be there." Chad Reynolds entered the room with his usual confident swagger, his blonde hair perfectly styled and his expensive suit tailored to perfection. He represented everything her family valued, everything she had been taught to want in a husband. Financial security, social status, the right bloodline. "There's my beautiful fiancé," Chad said, placing a possessive hand on her waist. "Ready to show off that ring tonight?" Ella looked down at the massive diamond on her finger, a ring that cost more than most people made in a year. "It's beautiful, Chad. Thank you. Nothing but the best for my future wife," he replied. But there was something hollow in his voice, something transactional about the way he looked at her. As the evening progressed and guests began arriving, Ella found herself going through the motions of being the perfect hostess. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at boring jokes, and accepted congratulations with gracious humility. But inside, she felt increasingly disconnected from her own life. The turning point came when she was standing near the grand staircase, champagne glass in hand, listening to Mrs. Whitmore drone on about her daughter's recent engagement to a senator's son. That's when she saw him. Miles Thomas stood in the doorway, but he was no longer the shy boy from high school. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his tall, athletic frame. His confidence was unmistakable, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. But what shocked Ella most was what he held in his hand. Chad's engagement ring. The exact same ring that was supposed to be on her finger right now. "Excuse me," Miles said, his voice carrying across the room with quiet authority. "I believe someone here is missing something." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him, then to Ella, then to the ring in his hand. Ella's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. How was this possible? Why was Miles here? And why did he have Chad's ring? "I think there's been some confusion," Chad said, stepping forward with obvious irritation. "That ring belongs to my fiancé." Miles smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Does it really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like it belongs to someone who's been running from the truth for far too long." His eyes met Ella's across the crowded room, and in that moment, she saw everything she had thrown away 11 years ago. The gentleness was still there, but now it was tempered with strength, success, and the wisdom that comes from overcoming rejection and building something meaningful from the ashes. Hello, my Stop Racism Extra family. Thank you for tuning in today. Before we dive deeper into the story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments below. Also, I'd love to know your thoughts. What did you think of the story so far? Let us know in the comments. We love reading them, and trust me, your words motivate us to keep making these videos. Let's make this video reach at least 50 comments. Your support means the world to us, and it drives us to create even more meaningful content for you. So don't forget to comment, share, and keep the positivity flowing. The morning after the engagement party, Ella sat in her pristine white kitchen, staring at her reflection in the polished granite countertop. The events of the previous evening played on repeat in her mind like a broken record. Miles Thomas had walked into her world with the confidence of a man who belonged anywhere he chose to be, and it had shattered every assumption she had built about her life. Her father, Daniel Peterson, entered the kitchen, his silver hair impeccably styled despite the early hour. He poured himself coffee from the expensive Italian machine and settled into the chair across from her, his steel gray eyes studying her with the intensity of a man accustomed to reading people's weaknesses. That was quite a spectacle last night, he said, his voice calm but loaded with disapproval. I trust you understand how damaging that kind of disruption can be to our family's reputation. Daddy, I had nothing to do with Miles showing up. I was just as surprised as everyone else. Miles. He said the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. The boy from high school. I remember him now. Talented, I'll give him that, but completely inappropriate for someone in your position. I thought we had made that clear years ago. The memory of that conversation came flooding back. Her father pulling her aside after he had heard rumors about Miles asking her to prom, explaining in his measured tone why such relationships were impossible for someone of her social standing. Not because of outright racism, he had been careful to explain, but because of the practical realities of their world. Different backgrounds create different expectations, Ella, he had said then. When you marry, you're not just joining two people together. You're combining families, social circles, business connections. Everything has to align perfectly, or the whole structure falls apart. Now, sitting in her kitchen 11 years later, those same words echoed in her mind. But something had shifted. The certainty she had once felt about her father's wisdom now felt more like a cage constructed from other people's fears and limitations. He's not the same person he was in high school, Daddy. He's obviously successful now, confident. Did you see the way he carried himself last night? Daniel's expression hardened. Success doesn't change where someone comes from, Ella. It doesn't change the fundamental differences in how you were raised, what values you hold, what kind of life you're meant to live. You have responsibilities to this family, to the community we've built over generations. Chad arrived an hour later, his usual composure slightly cracked around the edges. He had retrieved his ring from Miles through methods he refused to discuss, but the humiliation of the previous evening clearly still stung. We need to talk about last night, Chad said, settling into the living room's leather chair that cost more than most people's cars. That man made us look like fools in front of everyone who matters. His name is Miles, Ella found herself saying, surprised by the defensive edge in her voice. I don't care what his name is. What matters is that he somehow got hold of your ring and created a scene designed to embarrass us. The question is why, and what we're going to do about it. Ella studied Chad's face, looking for some sign of genuine emotion beyond wounded pride and social calculation. She found none. Even his anger seemed manufactured, more about public perception than personal hurt. Her best friend Rachel Simmons arrived that afternoon, bringing with her the kind of honest perspective that had kept Ella grounded since childhood. Rachel came from a similar background but had always been more willing to question the assumptions that governed their world. Okay, I need the real story, Rachel said, settling onto the couch with a cup of tea. Because the version I heard at the country club this morning involved everything from corporate espionage to a love triangle that's been brewing for over a decade. It's complicated, Rach. Miles and I have history from high school that I never really told you about. What kind of history? Ella found herself telling Rachel the truth for the first time. About Miles's invitation to prom. About her father's intervention. About the way she had rejected him, not because of who he was, but because of who she was expected to be. Ella, honey, do you realize what you're telling me? You rejected someone you actually cared about because you were afraid of what other people would think? It wasn't that simple. You don't understand the pressure I was under, the expectations? No, I understand perfectly. I grew up in the same world you did. But I also understand that we get to choose whether we let those expectations define us or whether we define ourselves. Rachel's words hung in the air between them, challenging everything Ella had convinced herself was true about her choices. For the first time in years, she began to question whether the life she had built was actually the life she wanted. That evening, alone in her bedroom, Ella found herself looking through her high school yearbook. There was Miles in his senior photo, young and hopeful, with dreams that seemed to sparkle in his eyes. She wondered what those dreams had been, whether he had achieved them, what kind of man he had become in the years since she had pushed him away. She also wondered what kind of woman she might have become if she had found the courage to say yes. The Peterson Foundation's annual charity gala was the kind of event that defined their social calendar. Ella stood in the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, watching the city's elite write checks that would ease their consciences while changing nothing fundamental about the systems that kept them in power. She had organized dozens of these events, each one a carefully orchestrated performance of philanthropy and social positioning. The auction is going beautifully, her assistant Marcus mentioned, approaching with a clipboard full of bid sheets. The silent auction alone has already raised over $200,000. That's wonderful, Ella replied, though she found herself wondering how much of that money would actually reach the communities they claimed to be helping. These events always felt more like elaborate social gatherings with charitable window dressing than genuine efforts to create change. She noticed the way she instinctively categorized the staff members working the event. The servers, mostly people of color, moved invisibly through the crowd, refilling glasses and clearing plates while being systematically ignored by the guests. The musicians, a talented jazz quartet, provided background ambiance while receiving the kind of polite applause, reserved for hired entertainment rather than respected artists. Ella Peterson, right? A voice behind her interrupted her observations. She turned to find a young black woman in an elegant navy dress, her natural hair styled in a way that was both professional and striking. Yes, that's me. I'm sorry. Have we met? Dr. Angela Hayes. I run the community health clinic that your foundation has been supporting. I wanted to thank you personally for the grant money. It's made a real difference in our ability to serve families in the downtown area. Ella felt an unexpected flush of embarrassment. She had signed off on that grant without really understanding what the clinic did or who it served. It was just another line item in their charitable giving portfolio, another tax write-off with the right optics for their annual report. Of course, Dr. Hayes, I'm so glad the funding has been helpful. Tell me more about your work. As Dr. Hayes spoke about providing healthcare to underserved communities, Ella became increasingly aware of how little she actually knew about the real impact of her family's charitable efforts. The stories were heartbreaking and inspiring, but they also highlighted the vast gap between her world and the world of the people they claimed to be helping. The biggest challenge we face is sustainability, Dr. Hayes explained. One-time grants are wonderful, but what we really need is ongoing partnership with people who understand the systemic issues we're trying to address. Before Ella could respond, Chad appeared at her elbow with his usual territorial possessiveness. Darling, the Montgomerys are looking for you. Something about the hospital wing dedication next month. Chad, I'd like you to meet Dr. Hayes. She runs one of the clinics we support. Chad's smile was polite but dismissive, the kind of expression reserved for service providers and hired help. How nice. I'm sure you're doing important work. The conversation ended quickly after that, with Dr. Hayes excusing herself with professional grace. But Ella couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something revealing about her own world, something she had never really noticed before. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Ella found herself in the hotel's bar, needing a moment away from the performance of her public life. That's when she saw him. Miles Thomas sat at the far end of the bar, nursing what looked like a glass of scotch. He was no longer wearing the formal attire from the charity event, instead dressed in a well-fitted casual shirt that somehow made him look even more confident than he had in his suit. "Enjoying the evening?" he asked when she approached, his voice neutral but not unfriendly. "It was illuminating," she replied, surprised by her own honesty. "I met someone tonight who made me realize how little I actually know about the work we claim to support. Dr. Hayes, I saw you talking with her. She's remarkable, isn't she? Building something real while most people just write checks and feel good about themselves. You know her? I've been consulting with her clinic on their expansion plans. Pro bono work. It's the kind of project that actually matters, unlike most of what passes for business in our respective worlds." The phrase, "our respective worlds," hung between them, a reminder of the gulf that had always existed between their lives. But for the first time, Ella wondered whether that gulf was as wide as she had always assumed. Miles, about the other night. You don't need to explain anything, Ella. I understand exactly why you made the choices you did back then. The question is whether you understand them now. His words cut deeper than any accusation could have. They forced her to confront the reality that her rejection of him had been based not on his inadequacy, but on her own fear of stepping outside the boundaries of her prescribed life. I'm not the same person I was in high school, she said quietly. Neither am I. But the difference is, I chose to become someone different. You just became exactly who you were always expected to be. He left cash on the bar for his drink and stood to leave, but paused at her shoulder. The real tragedy isn't that you rejected me, Ella. It's that you rejected yourself. 3 days after the charity gala, Ella found herself standing outside the downtown office building where Miles worked. She had spent hours trying to convince herself not to come, but Dr. Hayes' words about needing ongoing partnership kept echoing in her mind, along with Miles's challenge about choosing to become someone different. The building was modern and impressive, housing several successful consulting firms and law offices. Miles Thomas and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor, a testament to whatever success he had built since high school. The receptionist, a professional-looking woman with kind eyes, directed Ella to a conference room where Miles was finishing a meeting with what appeared to be community leaders. Through the glass walls, she could see him presenting charts and graphs, his entire demeanor radiating competence and authority. This was not the shy boy who had nervously asked her to prom. This was a man who commanded respect through expertise and integrity rather than inherited privilege. Ms. Peterson? The receptionist appeared at her side. Mr. Thomas will see you now. Miles's office was sophisticated, but not ostentatious, filled with books on urban planning and community development, rather than the sports memorabilia and family photos that decorated most of the executive offices she knew. Awards and certificates lined one wall, recognizing his contributions to affordable housing initiatives and minority business development programs. This is unexpected, Miles said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. What can I do for you? I wanted to apologize for the other night, and for 11 years ago. I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing to become someone different. Miles leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same intensity she remembered from high school, but now tempered with the wisdom of someone who had learned to protect himself from disappointment. Apologize for what, exactly? For rejecting me? For protecting your social status? For choosing the path that was expected of you? For all of it. But mostly for not having the courage to see who you really were, instead of just seeing what other people expected me to see. And what do you see now? The question caught her off guard because it forced her to articulate something she was still trying to understand herself. I see someone who built something meaningful instead of just inheriting it. Someone who chose to use their success to help others instead of just accumulating more privilege. Miles was quiet for a long moment, and Ella could see him weighing whether to trust her with his truth or maintain the professional distance that protected him from further hurt. Do you want to know what the hardest part was? He finally said. It wasn't the rejection itself. It was realizing that you saw me as a risk to your reputation rather than as a person worth knowing. That taught me something about how the world works, about how people like you see people like me. People like me? People who have never had, to prove they deserve to be in the room. People who can afford to make choices based on comfort rather than survival. People who can reject someone's heart and still sleep well at night because they know they made the practical decision. The Aken words stung because they were true, but they also sparked something defensive in Ella. That's not fair. You don't know what kind of pressure I was under, what my family expected. Your family expected you to maintain your place in a system that keeps people like me on the outside. And you chose to meet those expectations rather than question them. But I was 17 years old. I was scared and confused and trying to figure out how to navigate a world where every choice felt like it had enormous consequences. We were both 17, Ella, but your choices were about protecting privilege, while mine were about surviving without it. There's a difference. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken hurt and misunderstanding. Ella realized that she had come here expecting forgiveness, but what she was getting instead was truth, and truth was much more difficult to accept. I know I can't undo what I did, she said finally, but I want you to know that it was the wrong choice, and I've regretted it every day since. Have you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you built exactly the life you were supposed to build. Successful family business, engagement to the right kind of man, all the social connections that matter. If you regretted the choice, why didn't you make different ones along the way? The question hit her like a physical blow because it exposed the comfortable lie she had been telling herself. She hadn't just made one wrong choice at 17, she had spent the next 11 years making the same choice over and over again, choosing safety and social approval over authenticity and genuine connection. Maybe because I didn't know how, she whispered. Maybe because I was afraid that if I stepped outside the lines, I'd lose everything I thought I needed to be happy. And are you happy? The simple question unraveled something inside her. No, I'm not. I haven't been happy in years, maybe ever. I've been comfortable, secure, approved of, but not happy. Miles's expression softened for the first time since she had arrived. Then maybe it's time to figure out what would actually make you happy, instead of what you think should make you happy. The conversation with Miles had cracked something open inside Ella that she couldn't quite close again. She found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her perfectly decorated bedroom, questioning choices she had never allowed herself to examine before. The engagement ring on her nightstand seemed to mock her with its excessive sparkle, a symbol of everything she had thought she wanted, but now wasn't sure she had ever chosen for herself. Chad had been increasingly distant since the charity gala incident, spending more time at his office and less time discussing wedding plans. When he did come home, their conversations felt stilted and performative, as if they were both reading from scripts they no longer believed in. The wedding planner called today, Chad mentioned over dinner, cutting his steak with mechanical precision. She needs final approval on the flower arrangements by Friday. Which arrangements? Ella asked, realizing she couldn't remember the last time she had felt genuinely excited about any aspect of their wedding planning. The ones we discussed last month. White roses and baby's breath for the altar. Smaller arrangements for the reception tables. Very classic, very appropriate. Appropriate. The word had governed so many of their decisions that Ella had stopped noticing how often it came up in their conversations. Their wedding wasn't being planned around what would make them happy or what reflected their personalities. It was being orchestrated around what would look appropriate to their social circle. Chad, can I ask you something? What do you love most about me? He looked up from his plate, clearly unprepared for the question. What do you mean? I mean, when you think about spending the rest of your life with me, what makes you feel excited about that future? Chad's pause stretched uncomfortably long. I love that you understand our world, that you'll be able to navigate the social obligations that come with my position. I love that our families complement each other so well, that we make sense together. But what do you love about me as a person? Not as a social partner or a strategic alliance, but as Ella. Another pause. You're asking strange questions lately. Is this about that man from the other night? Because if he's putting ideas in your head, this isn't about Miles. This is about us. About whether we're getting married because we actually love each other, or because it's what everyone expects us to do. Sometimes I don't understand you anymore, Chad said, his voice carrying a note of frustration that felt familiar. We have everything we could possibly want. A beautiful home, successful careers, the respect of everyone who matters. Why would you want to complicate that with unnecessary emotional drama? That afternoon, Ella found herself driving through neighborhoods she rarely visited, areas where the houses were smaller and the streets less manicured than the exclusive enclave where she had always lived. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found herself parked outside the community health clinic where Dr. Hayes worked. The building was modest but well-maintained, with a small garden in front and a playground where children played while their parents waited for appointments. Through the windows, she could see families in the waiting room, mothers holding babies, elderly couples holding hands, teenagers reading magazines. It was a world away from the sterile perfection of her usual environment. Dr. Hayes emerged from the building during what appeared to be a break between patients, her professional composure softened by the obvious exhaustion of someone who cared deeply about demanding work. Ms. Peterson? What a surprise to see you here. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see the clinic in person. Would you have a few minutes to show me around? The tour was eye-opening in ways Ella hadn't expected. The clinic served hundreds of families who couldn't afford private health care, providing everything from routine checkups to chronic disease management to mental health services. The staff was small but dedicated, working with resources that seemed impossibly limited compared to the medical facilities Ella was accustomed to. We do good work here, Dr. Hayes explained as they walked through the pediatric wing. But we're always one funding crisis away from having to cut essential services. That's why sustained partnerships matter so much more than one-time donations. What would sustained partnership look like? Ongoing financial support, of course, but also advocacy. People with influence speaking up about the importance of community. healthcare, helping us navigate the political and bureaucratic obstacles that make our work more difficult than it needs to be. As they talked, Ella began to understand something that had never occurred to her before. Her family's charitable giving had always been about them, about their image and their tax benefits and their social positioning. They had never really considered whether their approach to helping others was actually effective, or whether it might be more about maintaining their own sense of moral superiority than creating meaningful change. Dr. Hayes, can I ask you something personal? How do you do work that matters when you're surrounded by systems that seem designed to prevent change? You focus on the people you can help rather than the systems you can't control. You do what you can with what you have, and you never stop believing that individual acts of care can add up to something larger. Driving home that evening, Ella couldn't stop thinking about the difference between doing something meaningful and doing something appropriate. For her entire life, she had chosen appropriate over meaningful, and she was beginning to understand the cost of that choice. That night, she called Rachel. "I think I'm making a huge mistake," she said without preamble when her friend answered the phone. "The wedding? Everything. The wedding, the life I've built, the person I've become. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for years, and I'm finally starting to wake up. What do you want to do about it? I have no idea. That's the terrifying part." The coffee shop where Ella had agreed to meet Miles was a far cry from the upscale restaurants where she usually conducted business. Located in the heart of the downtown district he was helping to revitalize, it was the kind of place that served the community rather than catering to tourists or business executives. Local artists' work hung on exposed brick walls, and the clientele included everyone from construction workers grabbing morning coffee to college students studying for exams. Miles was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and a stack of architectural plans spread beside his coffee. He looked up when she approached, and she was struck again by how much he had changed since high school. There was a quiet confidence about him now, the kind that came from knowing his own worth rather than needing others to validate it. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Ella said, settling into the chair across from him. "I know our last conversation was intense. I appreciate you reaching out. I'll admit, I was curious about what else you wanted to discuss. I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing to become someone different. I visited Dr. Hayes' clinic yesterday, and it made me realize how little I actually know about the work you do." Miles closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. "What did you think of the clinic?" "It was humbling. The dedication of the staff, the impact they're having with such limited resources. It made me realize that my family's approach to charity has been more about us than about the people we claim to be helping. That's not uncommon among people with your background. Charity becomes another form of social positioning rather than genuine commitment to change." His words could have sounded condescending, but there was no judgment in his tone, only the matter-of-fact assessment of someone who had observed these patterns for years. "Dr. Hayes mentioned that you've been consulting with them on expansion plans. What kind of work do you do exactly?" "Community development consulting. I help organizations like the clinic navigate the bureaucratic and financial challenges of serving underserved populations. Sometimes that means grant writing, sometimes it means strategic planning, sometimes it means connecting them with resources they didn't know existed." As he talked about his work, Ella saw a passion in his eyes that she rarely encountered in her own social circles. This wasn't just a career for Miles, it was a calling rooted in understanding what it meant to struggle and succeed despite systemic obstacles. "The project I'm most proud of is the affordable housing initiative we launched last year," he continued. "We've been able to help 15 families transition from rental properties they couldn't afford to home ownership in neighborhoods they want to live in. That must be incredibly rewarding work." "It is, but it's also frustrating because for every family we help, there are dozens more who need the same support. The scale of the need is overwhelming, and the resources available are always inadequate." Their conversation was interrupted when a young woman approached their table, her face lighting up when she saw Miles. "Mr. Thomas, I wanted to thank you again for helping us with the loan application. We got the approval letter yesterday." Miles stood up to embrace her, his genuine warmth evident in the interaction. "Congratulations, Sarah. I'm so proud of you. How does it feel to know you'll be a homeowner next month? Like a dream." "My daughter is going to have her own bedroom for the first time in her life." Tears filled the woman's eyes as she spoke. "I can never repay you for what you've done for us." "You don't need to repay me. Just be happy and take care of that beautiful daughter of yours." After Sarah left, Ella found herself studying Miles with new understanding. This was who he had always been, she realized. The kindness and empathy she had glimpsed in high school had matured into something powerful and purposeful. She's the single mother of a 6-year-old, Miles explained. Been working 2 jobs to make rent in a neighborhood that wasn't safe for her daughter. Now she'll have stability and equity and a real foundation to build on. That's amazing. How
do you do it? How do you stay motivated when the problem seems so enormous?
Because the alternative is accepting that some people matter less than others. I can't live with that belief, so I keep doing what I can to prove it wrong. His words hit her like a revelation. This was what it looked like to choose meaning over comfort, to build a life around principles rather than expectations. Miles had taken the pain of his rejection and transformed it into fuel for helping others, while she had used her privilege to insulate herself from anything that might challenge her worldview. Miles, I need to tell you something. Seeing you, now understanding what you've built, it makes me realize that my rejection of you wasn't just wrong because it hurt you. It was wrong because I robbed myself of the chance to become someone better. What do you mean? I mean that if I had found the courage to say yes to you back then, maybe I would have learned what it means to care about something larger than myself. Maybe I would have become the kind of person who makes a real difference instead of just writing checks and feeling good about it. Miles was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. It's never too late to become that person, Ella, but you have to want it for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Because you believe it's who you're meant to be, not because you're trying to prove something to me or anyone else. The Peterson family dining room had never felt more suffocating. Crystal glasses clinked against fine china as Ella sat across from her parents, the weight of their expectations pressing down on her like a physical force. The mahogany table stretched between them, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the tension crackling in the air. Ella, darling, you've been distant lately, her mother Lillian observed, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. Chad mentioned you seemed distracted at the Hendersons' gala. Daniel Peterson set down his wineglass with deliberate control, his steel-gray eyes fixed on his daughter. Is there something we should know about? The wedding is only 3 months away. Ella's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The mention of her engagement sent a familiar wave of unease through her chest, the same feeling that had been growing stronger since Miles's return. I've just been thinking about things. Thinking about what, exactly? Her father's voice carried the tone that had commanded boardrooms for decades. About whether I'm making the right choices. The words slipped out before she could stop them, hanging in the air like an accusation. Lillian's perfectly manicured hand fluttered to her pearl necklace. What could possibly be wrong with your choices? You're marrying into one of the most respected families in the city. Chad adores you, and you'll want for nothing. But what about what I want? Ella's voice grew stronger, surprising herself with its conviction. Daniel's expression hardened. What you want? Ella, you've been given every privilege, every opportunity. You have a responsibility to this family, to our legacy. A responsibility to marry someone I don't love? The silence that followed was deafening. Lillian's face went pale, while Daniel's jaw clenched with barely contained fury. Love? Daniel's laugh was cold. Love is a luxury we can afford because of the choices we make. Do you think your grandfather loved his wife when they married? Do you think I was head over heels for your mother? Daniel! Lillian protested, though her voice lacked conviction. No, she needs to hear this. He leaned forward, his presence commanding the room. Love grows from respect, from shared values, from building a life together. Chad respects you. He values you. He can provide for you in ways that what? Ella interrupted, her heart racing. In ways that someone else couldn't? The question hung between them like a blade. Daniel's eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. This is about that boy, isn't it? The one from high school? Ella's blood ran cold. How do you... I know everything that happens in this family, Ella. Did you think I wouldn't find out about your little reunion? Miles Thomas. He spoke the name like it tasted bitter. A nobody who got lucky, probably through affirmative action and handouts. That's not true. Ella's voice shook with anger. He earned everything he has. By playing the victim card, no doubt. Daniel stood, his tall frame casting a shadow across the table. Listen to me very carefully, Ella. That man is not part of our world. He never was, and he never will be. Whatever fantasy you're entertaining needs to end now. Lillian reached. Across the table, her fingers cold against Ella's wrist. Sweetheart, you're confused. It's pre-wedding jitters, nothing more. Once you're married to Chad, settled into your new life, you'll see how foolish this all seems. What if I don't want that life? The words came out as a whisper, but they might as well have been shouted. Daniel's face turned red. What you want is irrelevant. You are a Peterson. That name means something in this city, and I will not allow you to destroy 3 generations of reputation for some misguided guilt over a high school crush. It's not guilt. Ella stood, matching her father's intensity. It's realizing that I've been living someone else's life. You've been living the life we sacrificed to give you. Daniel slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. Do you have any idea what it took to build this family's standing? The connections I've cultivated, the deals I've made, the people you've stepped on? Ella shot back. The slap came so fast she barely saw it coming. The sharp crack echoed through the dining room as Ella's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning with the imprint of her father's hand. Daniel! Lillian gasped, rising from her chair. Ella touched her cheek, tears threatening to spill. But instead of breaking, she felt something crystallizing inside her, a resolve she'd never experienced before. I won't marry Chad, she said, quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Yes, you will, Daniel replied, his voice deadly calm. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself cut off from everything. No trust fund, no family connections, no safety net. You'll be nobody, just like him. Ella met her father's gaze without flinching. Maybe nobody is exactly who I need to be. The small cafe on the east side of town was worlds away from Ella's usual haunts. Mismatched chairs surrounded worn wooden tables, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sound of genuine laughter from working-class families enjoying their evening. Ella felt exposed here, her designer clothes marking her as an outsider in a space that felt more real than anywhere she'd been in years. Miles arrived exactly on time, his presence filling the doorway before he spotted her in the corner booth. He'd changed from his business suit into jeans and a simple black sweater, but he still carried himself with the quiet confidence she'd witnessed at their previous encounters. Thank you for meeting me, Ella said, as he slid into the seat across. From her? I'll admit I was curious. Miles signaled the waitress for coffee. Your text sounded urgent. Ella's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her mug. I need to apologize. Really apologize. Not just with empty words. Ella, please let me say this. She took a shaky breath. In high school, when you asked me to prom, I wanted to say yes. I wanted it so badly it scared me. Miles studied her face, his expression unreadable. Then why didn't you? Because I was a coward. The words tasted bitter. Because my father had spent years drilling it into my head that our family's reputation was everything. Because I was terrified of being ostracized by my friends, of losing everything I thought mattered. And now? His voice was gentle but probing. Now I realize I lost something far more important. Ella's voice cracked. I lost the chance to know someone who could have changed my life for the better. I lost my integrity. I lost you. Miles was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. Do you know what that rejection did to me? Ella shook her head, afraid to hear the answer. It broke something inside me. Not just the rejection itself, but the way you did it. In front of everyone, like I was something disgusting you needed to scrape off your shoe. His voice remained calm, but she could hear the pain underneath. For months I wondered what was wrong with me. Was I not smart enough? Not good enough? Was it because I couldn't afford the clothes your friends wore? Or drive the cars they drove? Tears spilled down Ella's cheeks. Miles, But then I realized something. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. It wasn't about me at all. It was about you. About your fear. Your need to fit into a world that demanded you see people like me as less than human. You're right. Ella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was taught to see differences as threats instead of gifts. I was raised to value status over substance, appearance over character. And now, what's changed? Ella met his gaze directly. Seeing you again, seeing who you've become despite everything I put you through. You didn't just survive my cruelty, you thrived. You built a life based on merit and hard work, not inheritance and connections. You became everything I pretended to be, but never was. Miles sat back, processing her words. I didn't come back for revenge, Ella. I came back for closure. I know, and I'm hoping that maybe, in some small way, this conversation can give us both that. The waitress refilled their cups and Miles added sugar slowly, as if buying time to think. What about your engagement, your family? I'm ending it. The engagement, I mean. As for my family, Ella's voice hardened. My father made it clear, tonight, that his love comes with conditions. If I don't marry Chad, I'm dead to them. That's a heavy price to pay. Not as heavy as the price of living a lie for the rest of my life. Ella reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for a second chance. I just needed you to know that you deserved better then, and you deserve better now. Miles looked at her outstretched hand, then back at her face. What are you asking for? A chance to prove that people can change, that I can change. Her voice was barely a whisper. Maybe. We can't go back, but maybe we can move forward. As friends, if nothing else. Miles was quiet for so long that Ella began to pull her hand back. Then, slowly, he reached out and covered her fingers with his own. His touch was warm, solid, forgiving in a way she didn't deserve. I'd like that, he said simply. For the first time in years, Ella felt like she could breathe. The Peterson Industries boardroom buzzed with tension as executives filed in for the emergency meeting. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, but the view felt more like bars on a prison cell as Ella took her seat at the massive conference table. Chad sat beside her, his hand possessively resting on her arm, while her father commanded attention from the head of the table. "We're here to address the unfortunate situation with the Riverside Development Project," Daniel announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Ella's stomach clenched. She knew about Riverside, a low-income neighborhood her father's company planned to demolish for luxury condos. Families would be displaced, small businesses destroyed, all in the name of profit margins and urban renewal. "The protesters are becoming a problem," Chad interjected, pulling up photos on his tablet. "They're camping outside our construction sites, harassing our workers. They're fighting for their homes," a voice said from the doorway. Every head turned. As Miles entered the conference room, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the space. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, but his eyes blazed with controlled anger. "Mr. Thomas," Daniel's voice dripped with disdain, "you weren't invited to this meeting. I represent 3 of the families being displaced by your project." Miles replied, setting his briefcase on the table with deliberate precision. "I have every right to be here." Ella's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't known Miles was involved with the Riverside situation, hadn't connected the dots between his law practice and her family's business dealings. "This is private property," Chad stood, his chest puffed with indignation. "Security! Sit down, Chad." Miles's voice was ice. "Unless you want me to discuss your firm's environmental violations in front of everyone." Chad paled and slowly resumed his seat. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he assessed this new development. "What do you want, Thomas?" Miles opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Fair compensation for the families you're displacing, relocation assistance, job training programs for the workers who'll lose their livelihoods when you tear down their neighborhood." "Absolutely not," Daniel laughed. "We followed all legal requirements. What happens to those people after we buy their properties isn't our concern." "Those people?" Miles's voice rose slightly. "Those people are human beings, families who've lived in that neighborhood for generations, small business owners who employ dozens of community members. They're obstacles to progress," Chad chimed in. "The city needs development, not slums." The word hit Ella like a physical blow. She looked around the room at the faces of people she'd known her entire life, board members, family friends, business associates, and saw their casual indifference to human suffering. "The Rodriguez family has owned their bakery for 30 years, Miles continued, his voice steady despite the fury in his eyes. "Mrs. Chen runs a daycare that serves 40 children. The Washingtons have turned their corner store into a community hub where teenagers can get tutoring and hot meals." "Very touching," Daniel interrupted, "but irrelevant. This is business. This is people's lives." Miles slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. Ella found herself standing before. She realized she'd moved. "He's right." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of a lifetime of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. "Ella, darling, sit down," Chad whispered urgently. "No." Her voice grew stronger. "He's right. We're destroying a community for profit, and we're calling it progress." Daniel's face turned red. "You will sit down and keep quiet." "I won't." Ella stepped forward, moving closer to where Miles stood. "I've spent my whole life keeping quiet while this family trampled over anyone who got in our way." "You don't understand business," one of the board members interjected. "I understand right from wrong," Ella shot back. "And this is wrong." Chad grabbed her arm roughly. "You're embarrassing yourself. And me." Miles moved so fast, Chad barely saw it coming. One moment Chad was gripping Ella's arm, the next he was stumbling backward as Miles positioned himself between them. "Don't touch her again," Miles said quietly, but his tone promised consequences. "How dare you?" Chad's voice cracked with outrage. "She's my fiancé." "Actually," Ella said, pulling the engagement ring from her finger, "I'm not." The diamond caught the light as she set it on the conference table. The silence that followed was deafening. "Ella," Daniel's voice was dangerously low, "pick up that ring and put it back on your finger. No, you're making a mistake that will cost you everything." Ella looked at Miles, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Then she turned back to her father. Some things are worth more than money, Dad. Like integrity. Like standing up for what's right. Like choosing love over fear. Security, Daniel roared. But as two guards entered the room, Ella walked calmly to Miles's side. I'd like to see those files on the Riverside families, she said. I think it's time I learned what fighting for justice actually looks like. You're right. Ella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was taught to see differences as threats instead of gifts. I was raised to value status over substance, appearance over character. And now, what's changed? Ella met his gaze directly. Seeing you again, seeing who you've become despite everything I put you through. You didn't just survive my cruelty, you thrived. You built a life based on merit and hard work, not inheritance and connections. You became everything I pretended to be, but never was. Miles sat back, processing her words. I didn't come back for revenge, Ella. I came back for closure. I know, and I'm hoping that maybe, in some small way, this conversation can give us both that. The waitress refilled their cups and Miles added sugar slowly, as if buying time to think. What about your engagement, your family? I'm ending it. The engagement, I mean. As for my family, Ella's voice hardened. My father made it clear, tonight, that his love comes with conditions. If I don't marry Chad, I'm dead to them. That's a heavy price to pay. Not as heavy as the price of living a lie for the rest of my life. Ella reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for a second chance. I just needed you to know that you deserved better then, and you deserve better now. Miles looked at her outstretched hand, then back at her face. What are you asking for? A chance to prove that people can change, that I can change. Her voice was barely a whisper. Maybe. We can't go back, but maybe we can move forward. As friends, if nothing else. Miles was quiet for so long that Ella began to pull her hand back. Then, slowly, he reached out and covered her fingers with his own. His touch was warm, solid, forgiving in a way she didn't deserve. I'd like that, he said simply. For the first time in years, Ella felt like she could breathe. The Peterson Industries boardroom buzzed with tension as executives filed in for the emergency meeting. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, but the view felt more like bars on a prison cell as Ella took her seat at the massive conference table. Chad sat beside her, his hand possessively resting on her arm, while her father commanded attention from the head of the table. We're here to address the unfortunate situation with the Riverside Development Project, Daniel announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Ella's stomach clenched. She knew about Riverside, a low-income neighborhood her father's company planned to demolish for luxury condos. Families would be displaced, small businesses destroyed, all in the name of profit margins and urban renewal. The protesters are becoming a problem, Chad interjected, pulling up photos on his tablet. They're camping outside our construction sites, harassing our workers. They're fighting for their homes, a voice said from the doorway. Every head turned. As Miles entered the conference room, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the space. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, but his eyes blazed with controlled anger. Mr. Thomas, Daniel's voice dripped with disdain. You weren't invited to this meeting. I represent 3 of the families being displaced by your project, Miles replied, setting his briefcase on the table with deliberate precision. I have every right to be here. Ella's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't known Miles was involved with the Riverside situation, hadn't connected the dots between his law practice and her family's business dealings. This is private property, Chad stood, his chest puffed with indignation. Security! Sit down, Chad. Miles's voice was ice. Unless you want me to discuss your firm's environmental violations in front of everyone. Chad paled and slowly resumed his seat. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he assessed this new development. What do you want, Thomas? Miles opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Fair compensation for the families you're displacing. Relocation assistance. Job training programs for the workers who'll lose their livelihoods when you tear down their neighborhood. Absolutely not, Daniel laughed. We followed all legal requirements. What happens to those people after we buy their properties isn't our concern. Those people? Miles's voice rose slightly. Those people are human beings, families who've lived in that neighborhood for generations, small business owners who employ dozens of community members. They're obstacles to progress, Chad chimed in. The city needs development, not slums. The word hit Ella like a physical blow. She looked around the room at the faces of people she'd known her entire life, board members, family friends, business associates, and saw their casual indifference to human suffering. The Rodriguez family has owned their bakery for 30 years, Miles continued, his voice steady despite the fury in his eyes. Mrs. Chen runs a daycare that serves 40 children. The Washingtons have turned their corner store into a community hub where teenagers can get tutoring and hot meals. Very touching, Daniel interrupted, but irrelevant. This is business. This is people's lives. Miles slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. Ella found herself standing before. She realized she'd moved. He's right. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of a lifetime of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Ella, darling, sit down, Chad whispered urgently. No, her voice grew stronger. He's right. We're destroying a community for profit, and we're calling it progress. Daniel's face turned red. You will sit down and keep quiet. I won't. Ella stepped forward, moving closer to where Miles stood. I've spent my whole life keeping quiet while this family trampled over anyone who got in our way. You don't understand business, one of the board members interjected. I understand right from wrong, Ella shot back. And this is wrong. Chad grabbed her arm roughly. You're embarrassing yourself. And me. Miles moved so fast, Chad barely saw it coming. One moment Chad was gripping Ella's arm. The next he was stumbling backward as Miles positioned himself between them. Don't touch her again, Miles said quietly, but his tone promised consequences. How dare you? Chad's voice cracked with outrage. She's my fiancé. Actually, Ella said, pulling the engagement ring from her finger, I'm not. The diamond caught the light as she set it on the conference table. The silence that followed was deafening. Ella, Daniel's voice was dangerously low. Pick up that ring and put it back on your finger. No, you're making a mistake that will cost you everything. Ella looked at Miles, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Then she turned back to her father. Some things are worth more than money, Dad. Like integrity. Like standing up for what's right. Like choosing love over fear. Security, Daniel roared. But as two guards entered the room, Ella walked calmly to Miles's side. I'd like to see those files on the Riverside families, she said. I think it's time I learned what fighting for justice actually looks like. Ella's apartment felt foreign to her now, like a museum display of someone else's life. Designer furniture arranged with mathematical precision, artwork chosen more for its investment potential than emotional resonance, everything a testament to wealth without warmth. She stood in the center of her living room, phone in hand, staring at Chad's contact information. The conversation needed to happen, but knowing what was right didn't make it easier. When Chad answered on the second ring, his voice was strained. Ella, thank God, I've been calling you for hours. I know. I needed time to think. Think about what? You humiliated me in front of the entire board. My father is livid, your father is threatening lawsuits, and the whole city is talking about your little scene. Ella closed her eyes, centering herself before responding. Chad, I'm calling off our engagement. Permanently. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. You can't be serious, he finally said. You're upset about some slum clearance project? Fine. We'll find another development. Your father can invest in something else. It's not about the project, Chad. It's about us. It's about who I am when I'm with you. Who you are is perfect. You're beautiful, accomplished, from the right family. We're perfect together. No, we're convenient together. There's a difference. Chad's voice grew desperate. Is this about him? That lawyer? Ella, he's using you. Can't you see that? He's trying to get back at your family through you. Miles isn't using me for anything. He doesn't need to. He's successful on his own merit. Merit? Chad laughed bitterly. He's a diversity hire who got lucky. One phone call from your father and his career is over. The casual cruelty in Chad's voice crystallized everything Ella had been feeling. And that's exactly why I can't marry you. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means you see people as either useful or disposable. It means you think success belongs only to people who look like you. It means you've never had to earn anything, so you can't recognize when someone else has. I've worked hard for everything I have. Have you? Did you work hard to get into Princeton? Or did your father's donation secure your spot? Did you work hard to get your job? Or did family connections make the calls? Did you work hard to afford this lifestyle? Or did you inherit it? Chad's breathing grew heavy on the other end of the line. So what if I had advantages? Everyone uses what they have. Everyone doesn't have what you have, Chad. That's the point. Fine. So I'm privileged. So are you. Why is that suddenly a bad thing? Ella sank onto her white leather sofa. The afternoon. Sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. It's not bad to have advantages. It's bad to pretend you don't have them. It's bad to use them to hurt people who don't. You're being naive. This is how the world works. Maybe it's time the world worked differently. Another pause. Shorter this time. He's gotten to you, hasn't he? That Thomas guy. He's filled your head with all this social justice nonsense. Miles didn't fill my head with anything. He just reminded me who I used to be before I learned to be ashamed of caring about people. You're throwing away everything we have for what? Some misguided guilt about high school? I'm choosing authenticity over comfort. I'm choosing growth over stagnation. I'm choosing to live with integrity instead of hiding behind inherited wealth. Chad's voice turned cold. You're choosing him over me. Ella considered the accusation. Was she choosing Miles? Or was she finally choosing herself? I'm choosing to become someone I can respect, she said finally. And you can't respect the person you were with me? No, Chad, I can't. The silence that followed felt final. Your father won't stand for this, Chad said eventually. My father doesn't control my life anymore. We'll see about that. When you're cut off, when you realize what you're giving up, you'll come back. And maybe I'll take you back if you apologize properly. Ella almost laughed at his arrogance. Goodbye, Chad. Ella, wait. She ended the call and immediately blocked his number. Then she scrolled to Rachel's contact. Emergency wine session needed, she texted. Bringing my own bottle and a lot of news. Rachel responded immediately. Already chilling? The glasses. Are you okay? I think I'm finally becoming okay. As Ella gathered her things to leave, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. For the first time in years, the woman looking back at her seemed familiar. Not the polished socialite she'd become, but the girl she'd been before fear convinced her to choose safety over truth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miles. Heard through the grapevine that you might need a friend today. Coffee later if you want to talk. Ella smiled, typing back. I'd like that. And Miles? Thank you for reminding me who I could be. His response came quickly. You reminded yourself. I just held up the mirror. Call to action. The transformation is accelerating, but Ella's biggest challenges still lie ahead. As she steps away from her old life, will she have the strength to build something new? And what price will she pay for choosing love over fear? The next chapter will test everything she thinks she's learned about herself. The steps of City Hall had never hosted a press conference quite like this one. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite towers reaching toward the gray October sky like mechanical prayers. Ella stood behind the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. The modest black dress she'd chosen felt like armor, professional yet personal, a deliberate departure from the designer gowns that had defined her public appearances for years. Miles stood in the crowd, his presence a steady anchor in the sea of curious faces and flashing cameras. Rachel flanked him, her supportive smile visible even from the podium. But it was the absence that struck Ella most forcefully. No family members in sight, no familiar faces from her former social circle, no Chad standing dutifully by her side. Thank you all for coming, Ella began, her voice catching slightly, before finding its strength. My name is Ella Peterson, and I'm here today to talk about the Riverside Development Project, but more importantly, to talk about responsibility. A reporter in the front row raised his hand. Ms. Peterson, is it true you've called off your engagement to Chad Reynolds? My personal relationships aren't why we're here, Ella replied, though her cheek still bore the faint mark where her father had struck her 2 days ago. We're here because Peterson Industries is about to destroy a community, and as a member of the Peterson family, I can no longer remain silent. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Behind the reporters, Ella spotted several residents from Riverside. Mrs. Rodriguez with flowers still dusting her apron from the bakery, Mr. Washington holding his grandson's hand, Mrs. Chen clutching a folder of photos showing the children she cared for in her daycare. For 28 years, I've benefited from the wealth generated by Peterson Industries without questioning how that wealth was earned, Ella continued, her voice growing stronger. I lived in luxury while my family's business practices displaced families, destroyed communities, and prioritized profit over human dignity. A Channel 7 reporter called out, "Are you saying your father's company engaged in illegal activities?" I'm about saying that legal and ethical aren't always the same thing. Everything Peterson Industries has done regarding Riverside may be technically legal, but it's morally bankrupt. The crowd stirred as a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Daniel Peterson emerged, his face thunderous as he strode toward the press conference. Chad followed close behind, along with 2 men in expensive suits who could only be lawyers. Furthermore, Ella pressed on, aware of her father's approach but refusing to be deterred. I'm announcing the establishment of the Riverside community. fund, using my personal trust fund to provide relocation assistance, job training, and business loans for families affected by the development. Ella! Daniel's voice boomed across the plaza as he pushed through the crowd of reporters. This press conference is over. But Ella didn't step away from the microphone. I'm also calling for a full investigation into Peterson Industries' business practices, including their environmental violations, their treatment of workers, and their pattern of targeting low-income communities for development projects. She's having a mental breakdown, Chad announced loudly enough for the microphones to catch. The stress of wedding planning, combined with outside influences, has clearly affected her judgment. The only thing affecting my judgment, Ella shot back, is finally choosing to use it. Daniel reached the podium, his hand grasping for the microphone. My daughter is not authorized to speak for Peterson Industries. I'm not speaking for Peterson Industries, Ella replied, holding her ground. I'm speaking against it. The confrontation. Played out in front of rolling cameras, father and daughter locked in a battle that represented more than family discord. It was privilege confronting conscience, old ways meeting new understanding. You're destroying everything I've built, Daniel hissed, close enough now that only she could hear. You destroyed it yourself, Ella replied. I'm just refusing to help you rebuild it on other people's suffering. Security guards flanked Daniel, but the crowd of reporters created a buffer zone that even Peterson influence couldn't easily breach. Miles stepped forward, his legal credentials giving him access that others might lack. Ms. Peterson has every right to speak her mind, he announced, his lawyer's voice carrying clearly. Any attempt to silence her raises serious questions about what Peterson Industries is trying to hide. This man is manipulating my daughter, Daniel declared, pointing at Miles. He's filled her head with lies to get revenge for some imagined slight from high school. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Ella felt the weight of every stereotype, every assumption about interracial relationships and ulterior motives. This was the moment her father expected her to buckle, to choose family loyalty over personal integrity. Instead, she leaned closer to the microphone. Miles Thomas didn't manipulate me, she said clearly. He inspired me. He showed me what it looks like to build success through merit rather than inheritance, to fight for justice rather than profit, to treat people with dignity regardless of their bank account or zip code. The crowd fell silent, sensing the magnitude of the moment. I may lose everything by standing here today, Ella continued, but I've already lost too much by staying silent for so long. As she stepped away from the podium, the questions from reporters became a cacophony behind her, but Ella heard only one voice clearly, Miles saying, I'm proud of you, as she walked toward whatever came next. 6 months later, the community garden bloomed where the abandoned lot had once festered with weeds and broken glass. Ella knelt in the rich, dark soil, her hands stained with earth as she transplanted seedlings alongside Mrs. Rodriguez and her teenage daughter, Maria. The spring sun warmed her shoulders through the simple cotton shirt she wore, a far cry from the designer blazers that had once defined her professional wardrobe. The tomatoes are coming in beautifully, Mrs. Rodriguez observed, wiping her brow with the back of her gloved hand. Maria's been taking pictures for her school project on urban agriculture. Ella smiled, watching the girl document each stage of growth with the dedication of a professional botanist. She's going to make an excellent environmental scientist. Thanks to the scholarship fund you helped set up, Maria said shyly. I never thought college was possible before. The Riverside Community Fund had grown beyond Ella's initial trust fund contribution. Public support following her press conference had generated donations from across the city, and several other wealthy families had quietly contributed after witnessing the positive media coverage. Peterson Industries had ultimately been forced to redesign their development plans, incorporating affordable housing and preserving existing businesses. Miles appeared at the garden gate, his sleeves rolled up and a bag of mulch balanced on his shoulder. The sight of him still made Ella's heart skip, though their relationship had evolved into something deeper than the desperate attraction of her youth or the guilty reconciliation of their recent reunion. The kids from Mrs. Chen's daycare are here for their nature lesson, he announced, setting down the mulch. Fair warning, they're extremely excited about the butterfly garden. A parade of preschoolers appeared behind him, their small hands clutching magnifying glasses and notebooks as Mrs. Chen shepherded them toward the designated learning area. The daycare had not only survived the development controversy, but thrived. With new funding and an expanded facility. Miss Ella! Miss Ella! 4-year-old Tommy tugged at her shirt. Look what I found! He opened his palm to reveal a small earthworm, its pink body squirming in the sunlight. That's wonderful, Tommy. Worms are excellent for the soil. They help the plants grow strong. Like you helped our neighborhood grow strong? Asked Keisha, a precocious 5-year-old who seemed to understand more about recent events than most adults. Ella felt tears prick her eyes at the innocent wisdom. We all helped each other, sweetheart. That's how communities work best. As the children scattered to explore their assigned garden plots, Miles approached with 2 bottles of water. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the bustle of activity around them. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Ella considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had stripped away virtually everything she'd once considered essential to her identity. Her father had followed through on his threats. Her trust fund access was blocked, her position at Peterson Industries terminated, her name removed from family charitable boards. Most of her former friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to risk social exile by association, but she'd also discovered strength she'd never known she possessed. Working with Miles's legal clinic, she'd helped secure housing for 3 displaced families. Her testimony before the City Planning Commission had resulted in new oversight procedures for development projects. The part-time job she'd taken at a nonprofit had taught her skills no private education had ever offered. I regret that it took me so long to find my courage, she said finally. I regret the years I wasted living someone else's values, but choosing this path? No regrets at all? Miles nodded, his expression thoughtful. I have a confession to make. Ella turned to face him fully, noting the serious tone in his voice. What is it? When I came back to town, when I confronted you with Chad's ring, I wasn't entirely honest about my motivations. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Part of me wanted closure, yes, but part of me was hoping you might have changed, that the girl I fell in love with in high school might still exist somewhere underneath all that privilege and fear. And now? Now I realize that girl never really existed. She was just my projection of who I wanted you to be. Miles smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. The woman you've become is so much better than my teenage fantasies ever were. Ella felt warmth spread through her chest, different from the desperate longing she'd carried for months. This was deeper, steadier, built on mutual respect rather than guilt or nostalgia. We're different people than we were, she agreed. Both of us. Good different? She looked around the garden, at Mrs. Rodriguez teaching her daughter about heritage through seeds passed down through generations, at Mrs. Chen patiently helping preschoolers identify different types of leaves, at teenagers from the neighborhood, volunteering their Saturday morning to build raised beds for elderly residents. This was what love looked like, she realized. Not the desperate need to be accepted that had driven her teenage years, or the comfortable arrangement that had characterized her engagement to Chad. This was love as service, as community building, as choosing to show up for something bigger than yourself. The best different, she said, reaching for Miles's hand. Their fingers intertwined as they watched Tommy chase a butterfly through the marigolds, his laughter bright as summer sunshine. And for the first time in her life, Ella felt completely authentically home.